Hey scholars, Miss Dodd here, and today we're going to do Domain 10, Lesson 6, George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. First though, before we get started with anything, I need to give a shout out to Rich Love in the Toledo classroom. Yesterday she took the shout out challenge and she called me and told me 3 things that she learned about the Declaration of Independence, George Washington, and the 4th of July. So way to go, Rich Love! If you would like to have your name shouted out in a video, you may also participate in the shout out challenge. Call me or text me something that you've learned from one of our videos. All right, time to get started. First thing, we will talk about what you should have did yesterday in the pausing point. We had several review activities. We had the You Were There pages. So you do your picture, do some writing about if you were there. So if you were there for the Boston Tea Party, draw and write what you saw. If you were there for Paul Revere's ride, draw and write what you would have seen. Our page today, we have a 3-boxer. So you need to do your thoughts from the read aloud, draw 3 events from the read aloud, and then write your 3 sentences for the read aloud. Remember your facts. And also think about your writing. Use capitals when you need a capital, lowercase when you need a capital, or lowercase, not lowercase when you need a capital. That's crazy. Make sure that you are doing spaces, organizations, facts, not opinions. Don't just say George Washington was cool. Give me a fact, something that you learned in our read aloud. All right, let's get started with some vocab. Alrighty, scholars. OMG, I thought I was ready. I really didn't think I had that vocab ready. I need to take a second to get it together. Maybe I was so excited about Rich Love's shout out. All right, next we have for vocab, we have the word army. Army is the group of people who protect a country and fight its enemies. George Washington is the commander-in-chief, so he's the person in charge of the army in our story, army. Next, we have daring. Daring means bold or courageous. If you do something that other people might think is scary, then you would be daring, you're brave, you're bold, you're courageous. Next word, we have defeat. Defeat means to beat someone in a game or a battle. So if you defeat them, that means that they lost to you. Struggled. Struggled means had to work hard to do something difficult. Struggled. I know that there are many scholars who, when they're doing their writing, they're working so hard, they might have a struggle. It might be hard for them, but they don't give up because they show that grit. Struggled. All right, let's get started with that story. Again, our story today, Lesson 6, George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. All righty. You'll remember that while representatives to the Second Continental Congress met and signed the Declaration of Independence, George Washington was far away from Philadelphia. He was sent north to Boston to fight the British. His was a very difficult job. Washington's army was made up of mostly farmers with no military experience at all. So they were not trained, they were not professional. They had no uniforms and only old guns called muskets, which they hardly knew how to fire. There weren't enough guns and there was hardly any gunpowder. So instead of bullets for these old guns, they used something called gunpowder, and that makes them fire. Let's take a look at that. Notice that George Washington, he is in a very nice looking uniform, but you can see all of the people in his army are just wearing their regular clothes. The wording of the Declaration of Independence was approved on July 4th, 1776. 5 days later, so that would be July 9th, messengers carrying copies of the Declaration reached New York, where General Washington's army was camped. His army heard the words and rallied in support of independence. A statue of King George was melted down to be made into bullets for the Continental Army. Remember, King George, he was the king in Britain, remember? And they wouldn't let us have any representation in Parliament. The whole reason we are having this Declaration of Independence and this battle. So they melted his statue down to make bullets. Oh my goodness. Alrighty. The men soon realized that they would never have enough bullets for the fight ahead. Later that summer, British warships were spotted entering New York's harbor. Remember, a harbor is a place where ships can safely dock in a body of water. Later that summer, the warships were spotted entering New York's harbor. King George had gotten help from the Germans as well. More than 30,000 trained troops arrived to fight the unprepared colonial militiamen. So remember, this is George Washington, but our army is just regular men, everyday people. So not trained soldiers, just farmers and fathers and brothers and just people who are in the colony who want to come together and support our country. But the British, they had trained men, and they had more than 30,000 of them. And they even had help from Germany. And this is an example, a drawing of the ships coming into New York Harbor. Look at all of those ships getting ready to come in, and they're all filled with men ready to do a battle. Okay. George Washington nearly lost his army in the fierce fighting around New York and New Jersey that fall. The Redcoats, so that's the British, chased the Continental Army, that's us, south across the Delaware River, thinking that they had scared them off. The Redcoats left only a small force to guard them on the other side of the river. It was December, and they felt that sure that nobody would fight during the dead of winter. But they were wrong. George Washington came up with a daring plan. Daring again means courageous, brave, bold. On Christmas night, he gathered his men together. It was snowing and it was cold, but Washington had the men get into their boats and they rowed quietly across the ice-filled river. We could even say that they creeped. Remember that vocab word, creeped? More than 2,000 soldiers crossed the river. The crossings took several hours. Marching through the wind and the sleet of the December cold, the Continental Army reached the British troops just before dawn. So remember dawn, the time when the sun's getting ready to come up. So just before that. While the Redcoats were still sleeping, Washington's men launched. So that means that they propelled, they had a surprise attack on the enemy camp. So the British thought they wouldn't be fighting in winter. It's Christmas night, and the British are still sleeping. And those Continental militiamen are coming. So imagine that. Think of how exciting that would be, and think about how nervous and worried they would also be. Okay. More than 2,000 soldiers crossed that river. So quite a few coming on that sleeping camp of Redcoats. The Redcoats were surprised, all right. Some of them came out of their bunks in their underwear, and they just held up their hands. It was a total victory for General Washington. Nobody in his army had been killed. Washington and his army returned to Philadelphia with shouts of joy. But the war wasn't over yet. Let's see what that looks like. It's a very famous painting, and you can see here's George Washington right here. He is in front of that boat. He's the leader, and all those men are rowing because they're getting ready to come. And look, there's our very first American flag. Yesterday, when I was going on a walk with Sophia, she actually pointed out in our new neighborhood that somebody has the colonial flag. So maybe I'll try to take a picture of it and show you guys. Okay? So the war was not over yet. The Continental Congress knew that they needed more help in order to win their war for independence. German soldiers were fighting alongside the British. Perhaps the French would send soldiers across the ocean to help the colonists fight against the British. It was no secret that the French and the British had long been enemies. The Continental Congress decided to send some men to France to ask for their support. Their chief representative was 75-year-old Benjamin Franklin. Remember, he also went to Britain to speak to Parliament about the unfair taxation. So they're sending Ben Franklin to go do this. The French did not like to lose in battle, and they still were angry about losing to the British in an earlier war. At first, they did not want to defeat the colonists. It was crazy to think that an army of farmers, that was us, colonists, could defeat one of the greatest armies in the world, the British Army. But an American victory in New York in the fall of 1777 changed their opinion overnight. They promised gunpowder, soldiers, and ships. So because we were able to win a battle, then the French said, okay, well, maybe you can do something after all, and maybe we will help you. General Washington's army was camped in Pennsylvania at a place that was called Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 and 1778. Snow lay on the ground when Washington and his men arrived. They pitched their tents and they built log cabins, but neither kept out the cold. The men were dressed in rags, and many of them had no shoes, walking barefoot in the snow. Remember when we talked about habitats, and we said that in order to adapt to a habitat, you need to have some sort of feature that will allow you to survive. So these are men who are out in the snow. We could say it's almost an Arctic habitat. And they don't have the blubber, they don't have the fur that the animals would have. They don't even have shoes. They have rags for clothing. It's not keeping them warm at all. Their shelters are not keeping them warm. So try to imagine how you would feel if this was a situation that you were in. There was hardly any food, and some days the men had little to eat and drink other than just bread and water. Disease spread through the camp, and many of the men died. The men missed their families, and they wanted to go home. Washington struggled to keep up his men's spirits. He camped in a tent beside them for some time, earning their respect. No battles were fought at Valley Forge that winter, but the cold and hungry men spent many hours training to be ready when they met the British in the spring. Let's see what a picture of that looks like. Now, one reason that him sleeping in the tents next to them got respect from them was because they said, well, if you are someone who is going to be sleeping in a tent next to us and you're suffering just like us, then you must actually care about us as a leader. And you know what, scholars? I'm trying to find my page, and for some reason I think that we are missing a page because I'm not seeing my Valley Forge page. Huh. Oh. Strange, not in the right order. But here, let me show you. So this is them. Look, they have a fire that they've built to try to keep warm. There's our flag. There's George Washington. But they don't have coats on. They're not able to stay warm. So it's not a very pleasant experience. It's not someplace that they really want to be. Okay? All right. That was all we had. So a quick review. The British had 30,000 men. They had all these troops. They were professional soldiers. They had weapons. And we didn't have any of that. We were just basic regular men coming in. We didn't have enough food. We didn't have enough clothing. We had to get help from France to even get enough ammunition and weapons. But we were able to win some battles, and we will find out some more about those. But right now it is time for comprehension questions. All right, first question. How would you describe George Washington's army? Question 2. Were George Washington and his army willing to fight the Redcoats? So that means, did they want to? Question 3. What happened on Christmas Day, 1776? Number 4. Think of a question that you could ask somebody that starts with the word who. For example, who did you hear about in today's read aloud? And we have one more question. The word struggled means difficulty and that you worked very hard to accomplish something. What is something that you've struggled with? Okay, again, I want to quickly go over the 3-boxer. 3 events from our story, and then write 3 sentences about them. I'll give one more shout out to Rich Love because she is the first person to complete the shout out challenge. And again, if you would like to be part of the shout out challenge, call me or text me something that you have learned from our read alouds. Alrighty, I will see you tomorrow, scholars. Bye.